What's up guys, TechLab here. Now in today's video we're going to be taking a look at this graphics card. This is an AMD Radeon RX 5500 XT and I recently purchased it, of course pre-owned because you can't really buy them new anymore. And as soon as I started testing it, I realized we got a little bit of a problem. This graphics card, when under load, gets a little bit warm. So of course it needs a bit of a clean, and I thought I would take you guys along for the journey to show you how to actually tear down a graphics card and replace things like the thermal paste, as well as giving it a bit of a deep clean. Now before we get into the teardown, it's probably worth noting that the card that we've actually got is this one. This is an MSI Mech OC graphics card. It is an AIB card. And AIB cards generally are pretty easy to tear down, but I'm not going to promise you that it's just as simple as this when you come to every graphics card. I do know that if you get a Founders Edition or a reference card, particularly from Intel and Nvidia, their cards are a little bit more difficult to tear down, so you probably want to go find a specific tutorial for the card that you've got. I generally find though that AIB cards just like this one are very simply designed and very easy to take apart, but before we do that, we'll obviously need some tools. I generally use a one of or multiple screwdrivers. We've got a smaller screwdriver there, something a little bit larger there, and of course a little tiny one just in case we get to any of those screws that are too small for the others. When it comes to cleaning the dust, I'm of course going to be using a paintbrush. This is a dry paintbrush, and if you've watched the channel before, you've seen me use this on multiple things. I like to use these because it doesn't damage anything on the graphics card. These brushes are quite fine, they're quite flexible, and then I'm going to pull anything off the PCB. Some people like to get a little bit rough with things like toothbrushes and that, but I don't really tend to find the need. This is just to remove some of this surface level dust, and then if there's anything a little bit more kind of stuck there, we can use something to just wipe it down. For cleaning things such as the PCB or even breaking down some of the thermal paste, you might need some of this. This is isopropylene alcohol. I'm not even sure that I actually said that correctly, but this is actually safe to use on electronics. You can actually get it anywhere on the card and it'll pretty much just evaporate away and it won't affect anything. I like to have a little bit of that on hand, but I generally don't tend to find that I'll need to use it because I tend to use things like this. Now these are specific cleaners from Arctic. This one here is actually a thermal surface purifier. It's something that you use basically after you've used this one. This is a thermal material remover. This will actually break down thermal paste on top of your die or on top of your CPU or any kind of component really. And then you can just easily wipe it away. And then the second one, the actual purifier, purifies the surface for when you actually install some more. Now, of course, you'll need a couple of cloths. I generally use this thing. This thing came with some Arctic thermic paste once, and you can see that it's absolutely covered, but I like to use this because it's a little bit soft and it doesn't create any kind of static. A bit of tissue paper, because why not? Just in case you make a mess, you need to kind of clean that kind of stuff up. And of course, when you rebuild, you will need some of this. This is thermal paste. You will definitely need some of this because it actually helps transfer the heat from the die itself onto the copper or the aluminium cooler that you're going to have strapped on top of it. I like to use this one, Arctic MX4. I don't find it's that expensive, but it is actually pretty decent stuff. And in actual fact, at one point, this is probably some of the best. They do newer versions than this, the MX5 and things like that, or you can get it in a totally different brand. And to be honest, if you are a bit of a PC gamer and you like to play around with your builds, you should always have some of this spare anyway, because you never know when you're going to actually start trying to take something apart or trying to improve it. Now, of course, before we actually start cleaning things, we're going to have to take this graphics card apart. And there is a little bit of a warning. If you have purchased your graphics card pre-owned, don't take it apart until you've actually tested it. We've obviously, of course, tested this in our testing rig, which is how we know that it runs a little bit warm. But if you actually start taking it apart and then cleaning it up, putting it back together again and it doesn't work, you don't know if it was actually broken when you received it or whether you actually caused something when you did it. And it's not really fair sending something back to a seller if you actually broke it yourself. So make sure you test them first, get them into a system, get them running up a game or a benchmark. It doesn't matter which one. Make sure you get a picture and you get no issues with it. And then it's time to actually start taking it apart. Now, to take this card apart, it's actually pretty simple. If we actually take a look at it from the side, we can see it's a very simple design. We've got a back plate here that is made out of plastic. We've got the PCB in the middle here, which is then sandwiched between a heatsink on the other side, with then a cooling solution or the fan system actually screwed to that. This is actually a layered card, which most of them are. And to get this one apart, we have to start at the back. On the back here, we have 4 screws. This actually holds the cooler to the card itself. We can't take the back off yet because we need to remove this. And to do that, we need to just take these 4 screws out. If you take a look at one of the screws, they do have a little piece of paper over the top. Now that is a warranty void sticker. If you do remove that, then the manufacturer could claim that you potentially broke the card, but Here we're talking about very old cards that are very dirty anyway, so that you probably won't have any kind of warranty at all anyway. So we can simply just punch through that and start undoing the screws. When you're undoing the screws like this, what you want to do is make sure that you put them in a safe place, because you do not want to lose one of these. If you do lose one of these screws, particularly these four on the back, then you're not going to be able to put it back together again, or you're going to have heating issues after. And the reason for that is because these four screws actually create an even sense of pressure across the die and your thermal paste, and you do desperately need that. So don't lose any of these screws, make sure they're put to the side. And I also like to just split them up a little bit, put them in nice little piles so I remember where they actually go back. Once you've actually taken those four screws out, we should be able to simply just crack the card. Now, if we look at the top here, we do have a little cable here. Now that's going to be the cable for the fans themselves. So they'll probably open up the other way. If we just pop them like that, we can see that everything comes apart. Now on this card, we can just simply unplug the fan system, which should just pull out like that. Be careful when removing these. Some graphics cards are actually they're absolute pain in the butt when you release these, and you can actually pull the wires out. But as long as you're gripping the white thing, you're going to be pretty good. We're going to actually start on the PCB itself, and if we have a look, we've got the die in the middle here, and the thermal paste is a little bit dry. It's not great, so we're going to obviously clean that up. Now for that, I'm going to be using my thermal material remover. We're simply just going to dot a bit on the top there, and then let it work its way in so that it actually starts eating up that stuff. Now I'm going to use this little cloth here because I've destroyed it anyway. It is technically a polishing cloth, but what we want to do is just move the compound around and kind of just clean it out a bit, get all that old thermal paste out. Now once the die is cleaned off, obviously you want to do the same to the cooler itself. We're just going to drop a little bit on here, let it kind of eat into that thermal paste, and we'll come back to it in a minute because it's quite thick on there where they've actually put the pad. And we'll continue on with the card itself. Now on these cards, you do sometimes have the extra chips and things around that have these little thermal pads. These ones are actually quite sticky still, so they're pretty decent. There's two actually stuck onto the card here and one on there. That probably goes onto another chip. But they seem fine. Sometimes you can get them and they're all broken up because what they've done is they've actually dried out, and what you'll need to do is actually get some new thermal pads to actually replace them. They're not that expensive, but you do need to make sure that you get the right ones of the right thickness. So what you want to do is either look your card up, there are specs online that will tell you that kind of stuff, or if you can't find them, once you take your card apart, you want to just peel them off and just give them a little bit of a measure and order something of that size. Now that we've got the card like this, we can see there's lots of dust and there's even spider webs inside. They're all kind of in there. We want to get our dry brush. And for the dry brush, I generally just like to brush all the dust away out of everything. Get it out of all these little fins and from around things. Now this card isn't actually totally bad. I think it was just the thermal paste that was quite bad. Some cards will be really bad and you'll have a lot of dust on them. And in those instances, you want to take your brush and you want to brush them all across, and you might want to use some canned air to actually get it out of places. But I generally find the little brush works fine. And you can always get some kind of cotton buds and kind of clean in between things. Now, if you're going to be using cotton buds, I don't actually have any at the moment, but if I did need them and I was going to use them on this, I would use the alcohol solution, and then it could clean up the board quite nicely without obviously causing any issues. But we'll just continue on and we'll clean off some of this dust here. With the extra dust cleaned off, I do want to take this back plate off because I want to actually make sure there's no dust in between the back plate itself. So to do that, we need to start taking out all of these screws all around. And I do believe that we also need to remove them from this heatsink here. It was the same on the RX 5600, which was pretty much the exact same model of this as well. It was a MSI Mech OC version, so I'm going to kind of guess that that's what we need to do. Now with all those screws removed, we should be able to simply just separate the back plate from the actual card itself. It does feel a little bit stuck over this side a little bit. Not quite sure what's actually holding it. Sometimes they do actually put these little sticky thermal pads on the back. I have had cards where they've been absolutely terrible to take these back plates off. One in particular was the R9290 that we had, which was also an MSI card, but they'd actually stuck lots of double-sided tape on the back to keep the back plate on, and it was just impossible to remove. But for this one, it's simply just kind of unscrewed off, and fell off. It's probably because it's a plastic one and it's not really acting as any kind of heatsink. As we can see, the card's pretty clean though. There's not a lot on there. It's just a bit of dust, so we'll just brush that dust off. And then it kind of looks all nice and clean. There's not any dust on the backplate itself really. Again, just kind of just surface stuff, so we'll just brush that off too. And then that is all cleaned up. Now the cooler itself is where most of the dust is actually going to be, because of course the fans blow the dust onto the cooler and it's going to get stuck into all of that. So we'll obviously need to remove that. But first what we're going to do is we're going to remove that thermal paste, because otherwise it's going to get everywhere. To do that, I'm going to simply take some of this tissue paper and I'm basically just going to drag the thermal paste off. As you can see, it's being removed quite easily, and that's because of that thermal paste remover has eaten straight the way through it. And of course, we're not really going to touch these pads at all. We're going to just give them a little bit of a brush. We can see there's some dust on the side here, so we're going to brush that dust off. But the pads themselves are nice and sticky still. They've got lots of life left in them, so let's just get rid of some of this dust. Now to take the cooler off itself, of course, the cooling solution, the fans and the shroud are actually screwed to the cooler. So what we need to do is actually remove that. And on many cards, what you're going to find is it's just going to be screwed on the sides here and here. And when we flip it over, here and here. So we just need to undo those screws and then it should actually come apart. And there we have it. So the cooler is now separated from the fans. And as you can see, they are much more dustier than the rest of the card. This is of course where all the dust is going to lay, but it is only surface dust again. There's nothing actually here that's really grimy. It does look really bad, but if you actually just wipe your finger on it, you can see the dust just wipes away. So we're not going to need anything really extensive. What we are going to do is we're going to very gently use our brush to just brush all the dust onto the desk here. I don't like doing this sometimes because I don't like to get the mess in the studio, but sometimes needs must and you have to do it. So we'll just make sure it goes all into the middle, and then we can just like wipe it up very quickly. To kind of get the dust out of your heatsink, you just want to go with the actual fins themselves. Make sure you get all that dust out, and then we're going to go down those kind of edges and just get it out of those kind of horizontal edges there. And our heatsink is now pretty clean. We'll put that to the side, and as we can see, there is lots and lots of dust that's come out of that. All of this dust would have actually been stopping the thermal capabilities of that heatsink, because obviously the air cannot get out of the metal fast enough because it's got a new layer on it. And for the fan system, we're going to be doing the same. Sometimes if you have a big buildup of dust on your fins, they can actually unbalance the fans themselves. So sometimes you get a bit of noise from your system. And that's another good reason why you want to do this, because you want to make those fans live a little bit longer. So all we need to do now is just knock off the dust. We'll use the brush again. We'll get all into these fins and we'll pretty much give it a good cleaning down. Get it nice and clean. To get into the fins, I generally hold the fan from the other side with my 2 fingers and then just get nicely into those fins. You want to be careful here. This is why we use an extra long brush, an extra long soft brush, because if you use the short stubby ones, sometimes they're a little bit kind of much for the fins themselves, and you do not want to break any of these fins off. You could remove the fans themselves. They do have little screws, but you have to get through the fin blades and get the screws out. Sometimes that's not actually worth it, particularly if it's just surface dust like this. If they were totally grimy, where this just wasn't working and the dust wasn't coming off, I would actually remove the fans, but you do run a risk of breaking them. So you want to be careful doing that, because if you break one of these fins on these fans, you're going to have to order a new one. And sometimes they don't even make them for older cards. So just be aware of that if you need to do it. For us, we don't need to do it for this one. It's just very simply coming off with a brush. Don't forget, while you actually got the cooler off itself, that you do the other side, because you don't want to be pushing any more dust back into the system. While it's off, you just want to go across the blades a little bit, get in between everything, get the dust off, particularly on these kind of threads that are holding the fans into place. Otherwise, you're just going to blow the dust back into the graphics card, and we don't want that. Now, to put the card back together again, all we got to do is just do the reverse of what we did when we actually took it apart. So we just need to drop this cooler onto here. Make sure you get it the right way round. The screws will only line up one way anyway, so that should be good. Add the screws back into here, and then basically just repeat the process. Now with everything actually back together again, we've got the cooler with the fans all back together again. It's nice and clean. We've also got the card and the back plate all installed. Of course, we need to reinstall that thermal paste onto the die here, because we need to transfer the heat from the die to the cooler itself. And to do that, we obviously need our thermal compound. Now, thermal compound on one of these is a little bit different. Graphics cards don't really have an IHS. They just basically have the die that is open, This is literally how we used to have to do CPUs back in the day before they got really fancy. And to do it, basically, we just need to put our thermal compound onto the middle of it, and we make sure we get plenty on these because we need the surface area to be very well covered, because that whole square in the middle is going to get very hot. And then I like to use the little spatula and just make sure that it's completely flat across the top. Now, the reason that we do this is because if you just put a dot in the middle, and of course you put your cooler down and it doesn't actually cover the whole die, then you're going to run into thermal issues and it's going to be worse than it was before. So let's make sure that it's nice and thick. It goes all the way up to the edges of that die there, and then we should be good enough to install the cooler back on. Now that we've got plenty of thermal paste on the die itself, it's time to reinstall the cooler. Now what I like to do with this is actually just to do it in the reverse. I like to get this plug back in here. That's actually plugged in now. And then what I do is I'll turn the card round and just flip it back over so that the holes line up. Now that the graphics card is actually clean on the inside, there is a little bit of a tip at the end of this. I actually like to make sure that the outside is well protected and clean too. And to do that, I like to use a little bit of this. WD-40 is actually fantastic for cleaning up plastics, and this card is completely plastic, as well as giving it back that original shine and protecting it for the future. To simply do this, all you want to do is actually just spray a bit of WD-40 or plastic cleaner, whatever you actually fancy, onto a bit of a cloth and then just give it a wipe down. Now this will actually just pick up any extra dirt and dust, and it'll actually eat through that kind of stuff, as well as actually making the card nice and shiny to go back into your system. And because we're doing a graphics card cleaner, why wouldn't you want the outside looking nice too? Just do it on all of the plastics. As you can see, it starts to really shine up, and we're taking dirt off the plastic that the brush couldn't. We'll just go in and out of everywhere. You can do all of the fan blades too if you really want to, although they're going to pick up dust very quickly anyway. But apart from that, it's a nice little touch to the last of it, and you can also do the nice little bit of metal. Now, to stop this graphics card from getting so dirty in the future, there are some simple things that you can actually do. And one of them is, of course, keeping the little rubber bungs that you get with the graphics card. This one actually came with all four, so whoever had this graphics card before really did look after it. They kept the box for it, they kept everything for it. There is also a PCIe cover that's actually still in the box. And I like to reinstall all of these little plugs, even on a system. If it's in a working system, I will only remove the one that I will use, whether it's the HDMI or DP, whichever one you use. And I will leave the other covers in to stop any dust from getting inside those kind of ports. It really helps the graphics card in the future. You also want to make sure that your case is actually dust free. And to be able to do that, you need to install dust filters. If your case doesn't have any dust filters, then this card is going to get pretty dusty pretty quick again. So make sure you have a look at how you can do that. If you want us to do a video on how to add dust filters to a system, if you don't already have them built into your case, let us know in the comments below and we'll make a video to show you how to do it yourself. This card is now actually going to go back in the benching rig now that it's all cleaned up and ready to go. And I'm actually looking forward to seeing what this card can do. I did test its bigger brother, the RX 5600 XT, recently. Make sure you check the channel if you want to watch the results of that. And that card actually really surprised me, and I'm hoping this one does too. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content, and also let us know again in the comments below if you want us to do any other guides. And I'm sure, as always, we'll catch you in the next one.